So we have prayer cards. If you ever need prayer for anything, by all means, please let us know. We want to pray for you, and you can do that. We also have cards back there. Serve with our ministry team. If maybe the Lord's putting on your heart, you want to get involved in some way in Vista Church, you want to help serve in ways, we've got a multitude of ways that you can do that with setup and tear down, hospitality, greeter, AV tech team, worship team, home group leader, prayer team, youth team, children's team, and community outreach. Lots of different ways, and all you got to do is fill one of those out, drop it in where our new offering box is. I still get some of you asking me what happened to those cabinet boxes. They were too big and just a pain. So we got just a small offering box that's on the back table now. So we don't take an offering here at Vista Church. If you've gone here any length of time, you know that. But now the box is in the back, and it's just one box, and it's very small. And just drop that in there if you want to do that. So turning your Bibles, if you would, to Genesis. And I really struggled, debated with how I wanted to open this particular message. Lots to look at today. And you know, the way that it works with teaching through the Bible is, like last Sunday, I got through the first 24 verses of Genesis 30. So what we do is we pick it up where I left off, and we're going to start in the 25th verse. But you know, everybody has to do this in life, unless you are an exception, and it's really an exception. We're all stuck with a third of our life. We're all stuck with what amounts to, they say, about 90,000 hours of our life. Anybody know what I'm talking about? 1/3 of your life is spent doing this, about 90,000 hours, and really, with very rare exception, every single one of us has to do it. It's called work. A job, right? 1/3 of our lives we spend working. Now, when it comes to your job, everybody happy with your job? Yeah. Everybody love it? Everybody happy with your boss? I hear a lot of different yeses and nos and laughs. And, you know, maybe you have a supervisor, and then that supervisor, so however many people you have to answer to. But because it's such a large portion of our lives, because we spend so much time doing it, and there's a lot of things we can't control when it comes to working for people. Comedians and musicians, we've all come up with ways to, I don't know, make it easier to deal with, like with different jokes and different humor and different songs. Like Dolly Parton had a song, Working What? 9 to 5. Was that Dolly? Yes. I knew it was. I just wanted to see if you did. Working 9 to 5, right? And then we have ways of dealing with the oppression sometimes of a boss or an organization that we just feel like is not the friendliest. We call it working for the man, right? And the man in that case is usually a pejorative, right? It's a denigration because maybe they're heavy-handed, maybe they have a system or a way of doing things. We have a way of saying, stick it to the man. That's just on a Progressive commercial right there. Flo and the rest are sitting around with some dude, and he says, yeah, stick it to the man, right? Or we have another way of expressing this. It's called the man is keeping me down, right? I mean, you can think about different expressions and ways that we deal with this kind of stuff. But today's message I titled, Working for the Man, because that's exactly what we're going to see in this case. So I said I had a struggle with how I wanted to open. I guess I just did it that way. So Genesis 30, let's pick it up where we left off last Sunday in the 25th verse. And remember, we're looking at Jacob's situation. We are looking at the third of the patriarchs. Abraham, who had a son named Isaac, who had a son, at least in this case, he had two, but the one that is the patriarch is also now called Jacob, right? And so we've been looking at Jacob's life for a while, and how it is that he has ebbed and flowed, had ups and downs, and all the craziness, if you were with us last Sunday, all the craziness that we witnessed with Jacob and his two wives and their maids, which became concubines. So we'll get into that in a second, but we pick it up. And it came to pass, when Rachel, who finally had borne Jacob a son, and this was Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, his father-in-law, who also, by the way, happened to be his employer. He also happened to be the man that he was working for. He comes to him and he says to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me," I like this, "give me my wages and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service, which I have done for you." Now, refresh your memory of just what exactly Jacob is asking for here with his father-in-law Laban. We know that he worked 14 years for his father-in-law, taking care of his flocks. He did that to procure a wife initially, we know, and then he had to work another 7 years to procure the wife that he really wanted. That's how he got 2 wives. And we know that what he did was he took care of Laban's flocks. He had sheep, he had lambs, he had goats. Are there any shepherds here this morning? Anybody ever shepherded? Not a single. You shepherded. I like that. So it's not an easy thing. Not that I've done it, but I've read about it. It's a very difficult thing to be a shepherd, especially in this day. It took like a lot of commitment. And he looked after his father-in-law's flock, and his family had grown as well. We know that. He had 2 sister wives, right? Rachel and Leah. He had 2 maids that became concubines named Zilpah and Bilhah. He had 12 children at this point. 7 from Leah, 6 boys and 1 girl. 2 from Zilpah, 2 from Bilhah, both boys, all boys. And then 1 at this point from Rachel. And though he's worked for Laban for 14 years, hear me when I say this, 14 years, he has absolutely nothing to show for it except for everything I just said. All these wives, all these children. All of these children would have been 12 and under. The oldest, Reuben, would have been about probably 12 years old by now. Can you imagine 12 kids, 12 and under, running around in the same little camp, the same little tents? It would have been crazy. And so finally, Jacob comes and he says, after all of this to Laban, "Give me my wives and all of my children, and let me go back to my home in Canaan, and to my dad Isaac, and to my mother Rebekah, and to my brother Esau." Remember, he was only supposed to be there for a couple of days. If you go back and you remember the plan that his mother said, Rebekah said, because his brother was so angry that he stole his birthright, or blessing rather, he stole that blessing, that he was so angry that his mother said, "You got to get out of here. Go to the land of my brother, the land of our ancestors, and find a wife for yourself there. A couple of days, and then once your brother's anger, it subsides, you can come back." Those couple of days, as we just saw, turned into 14, which will be by the end, after today's little arrangement, 20 years. He'll never see, as far as the Bible tells us, his mother Rebekah again. That was a sad thing, but you know what? That's how it all worked out. And after 14 years, having nothing, he says to his father-in-law, "Give me my wages so that I can go back and I can start to take care of my own family. I've been taking care of your flocks, and as we're going to see, you have prospered greatly, Laban. I've done a really good job. Now I want to start taking care of this family." And that doesn't sound like a hard thing to do, wouldn't you agree? I mean, if Laban truly, with his daughters and his grandchildren, cared at all about them, he would have saw their needs needed to be met as well. But I want you to see, because the text is going to bear this out, this is a really bad dude. Look how Laban responds, and it tells us a lot about how this whole arrangement was working out and who it was really working for. Look at verse 27. "And so Laban said to him, 'Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes. For I have learned by experience,'" that's a word I want you to hold on to, "I've learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Because of you, God has blessed me." Now, you're going to find that Laban was not a believer in the one true God. Laban actually had a lot of family gods, a lot of personal gods. And he really was involved in this word experience, is the Hebrew word for enchantments, some sort of divination. That's how he discovered, according to him, that it was that he was being blessed. Man, why do I have so much? Through divination and enchantments, through this way of finding out, God has shown me that I have done so well because of you. And so he says in verse 28, then he said, name me your wages, and I will give it. Now, in case you heard that right, or thought you heard that right, you did. What he essentially is saying is, don't leave. I'm doing great because of you. How about I pay you to stay? And that's really tragic, because for 14 years, all of the service and the work that he had done for this man, he had received nothing yet. Now, technically, it was supposed to be going towards all of the labor that he had been doing. All of that technically was supposed to go towards what's called a dowry. It's really kind of known as alimony in advance. In the event that Jacob was out of the scene, and both Rachel and Leah needed to be taken care of, all of the effort and money that Jacob spent should have been put aside by Laban for the event that his son-in-law died and they needed to be taken care of. That's what a dowry was. It was really alimony in advance. If they divorced, if Jacob said, I don't want anything to do with you anymore, wives, which was very easy in that day to do, right? If you know about Jews and the Hebrews, if they burnt the toast, he could say, I'm done. Here's a writ of divorce. They had no representation. They had no court system to defend the wife. She was, for all intents and purposes, unfortunately, a second-class citizen as far as the Jews were concerned. They actually prayed, thank God I'm not a dog or a woman. That's how low that wives were pictured at that time. And that's why when you read the New Testament, you see how high Jesus and the gospel elevated women. How it was that he put them on equal ground. Neither slave nor free, Greek nor Jew, man nor... We're all the same according to the gospel, and that was a great elevation. But at this time, folks, I want you to see, that's where the money was supposed to be going. But instead, Laban was keeping it all for himself. He could have been gracious. He could have been generous. And he could have said, I want you to succeed, so I'm going to pay you for these 14 years. But instead, because he is so greedy, he says, I'm not paying you anything. Oh, now you're going to leave. What are your wages? And listen to what Jacob says. Jacob said to him, you know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. I told you that's what he did. He watched them. For what you had before I came, Jacob says, was little. You didn't have very much. And it is what you have now, it's increased to a great amount. And then Jacob says, the Lord has blessed you since my coming, and now when shall I also provide for my own house? He's like, I've got a huge tribe here. If you don't notice this, I need to start taking care of my own, not just your flocks and your people. So he said, what shall I give you? Laban did. And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. He liked the sound of that right off the bat, right? Stop right there if you would, please. But then he goes on, if you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. By the way, it's 6 more years. This is the beginning of 6 more years of working for the man. Let me pass through. Here's Jacob's plan. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep and all the brown ones among the lambs and the spotted and speckled among the goats. Again, those 3 things, lamb, sheep, and goats. And these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come when the subject of my wages comes before you. Everyone that is not speckled, all of the flocks that you have, that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs, will be considered stolen if it is with me. And Laban said, that sounds awesome, right? Oh, that it were according to your word. That's a way of saying, yes, please. And so it goes on to say, so he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hands of his sons. That would be Laban. What he did is he listened to Jacob, and so he took all of these specific ones, and he removed them from his herd, and he gave them to his sons. And then it says, in order for no commingling of these animals to happen, it says he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Men and women, I'm going to give you a little bit of a teaser here. There's really no other way to say it, so I'm going to be blunt. This guy Laban is a bad man, and that is not a good bad. That is a bad, right? He was awful to the core. In fact, Jacob he lays out a plan that on the surface will only benefit his father-in-law, Laban. He had a reason for it, but Laban didn't know what the reason was. I'm going to get there in a second. But instead of arguing with his son-in-law, instead of looking at his son's needs and his wives, his daughters really, and all of his grandchildren and saying, hold on, wait a minute, Laban, or Jacob, that sounds like that's heavily weighted in my favor. You need something for yourself as well. Let's renegotiate that so it's a little bit better for you. Instead of any sort of retort, any sort of, hold on, wait a minute, all he says is, yes, please. That's exactly what I want. Again, showing he was greedy to the core. Whatever benefited him, Laban was all for. But I want you to see Jacob in the plan that he had. Look at what Jacob does. I have to read this all in the same section. I've got my clock up here, knowing how long I go this morning, all right? Because this is a lot of scripture. And so track with me. If we break it up, it's like you're going to come back next Sunday and be like, we already heard all this. It's the same stuff. So now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar. This is his plan. And of the almond and chestnut trees. He peeled white strips in these rods and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Who gets the streaked, speckled, and spotted? Jacob does. So we're going to talk about the rods in a second. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves and didn't put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. These are special rods, wouldn't you agree? But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. Did I say that Laban had a plan of his own? Yeah, he thought, man, this is the best plan I've ever heard. Jacob, thanks. But Jacob wasn't a dummy either, and you're going to find out why the rods and the flocks and the prospering. Thus the man, Jacob, became, highlight this, underline this is awesome. He became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks. And then for whatever reason, it adds to his prospering female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Wasn't even a part of the herd, but as you're going to find out, Jacob is going to be greatly blessed. You know, when you look at this story, you got to stop and say, what kind of Jedi mind tricks was this guy into, right? What kind of dark arts was he all about? What kind of weirdness or, voodoo was this guy into? And I'm just going to say there's a lot of debate about what he was doing here. And some people would say, well, that's 14 years of shepherding. And as he was a shepherd for 14 years, he obviously learned some what's called animal husbandry, right? He obviously learned some ways to make all of these animals procreate when they needed to and with the ones they needed to. He took the weaker ones, gave them to Laban. He kept the stronger ones from himself. He put these rods, these poplar rods and other rods, And a lot of people will say, well, he learned this, and so that's what he was doing. Others would say, no, this was just a superstitious thing, you know? And if you look at it today, there's absolutely zero evidence that what he did would actually work. There's no shepherds today that would say, oh yeah, that works. Just find some poplar rods and put them in front, and they're going to mate, and they're not going to mate. I mean, a lot of people would say had nothing to do with it at all. And where I come down on the whole thing is he's going to make clear exactly how he prospered. He's going to make it very obvious, and not everyone was happy with how he was faring. So look at now 31:1. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, here's what Laban's sons were saying about this whole arrangement. Jacob has taken away, read this, all that was our father's. And from what was our father's, he has acquired all of this wealth, right? They're upset about this because Laban's flocks were diminishing and Jacob's flocks were prospering. And Jacob wasn't naive to this. He saw the countenance of Laban, his father-in-law, and indeed it wasn't favorable toward him as it was before. And I would even argue that how favorable was it even before? Not that much. But now it's even worse than not that much. Now he's quite angry with the situation, even though he agreed with it in the beginning. Then it says, the Lord said to Jacob, here's God speaking into the midst of this, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. It's not the first time he spoke to Jacob. I believe this is the third time that he spoke to Jacob, and this is the second time he has told him these exact words. I will be with you. And the good news is Jacob was already trying to do this, right? And now we can really fast forward and we realize 6 years, the text doesn't say it, but 6 years have elapsed from what I read to you in, 29:25 to now 31, or 30:25 to now 31 verse 3. 6 years have elapsed and gone by. And so Jacob, it says, sent and called Rachel. Once he saw that the sons were mad at him, that the father, his boss, his father-in-law was mad. Now he says, we got to get out of here. So he calls Rachel and Leah to the field. He doesn't talk about this at the tent where he can be overheard. He says, you got to come out here. I need something to say to you. And he brings them out to the field and to his flock. And he says to them, this is a really awesome husband message. A really great statement that he says, I see your father's countenance. It's not favorable toward me as before, but the God of my father doesn't say is going to be with me. He says has been with me, right? This is going to start to show us where the blessing came from. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages how many times? I mean, so they came up with this plan, but as Jacob began to prosper more and Laban began to prosper less, obviously 10 times Laban came to his son-in-law, his worker, and he said, well, no, let's do it this way. How about this? We don't know exactly how he changed the wages, but we know that he changed the wages 10 times. Anybody would want to work for that kind of boss? Get called into the office? You know what? We're downsizing. We need to change your wages. Unfortunate, okay. What's it going to turn out? 5%, you're going to have to take a deduction. Everyone else in the office is too. You know what? You got to do what you got to do. You get called in again. 6 months later, we got to change your wages again. I mean, are you going to be, this is working for the man. Wouldn't you agree? You agree to that wage change. You don't like it? You start looking for other jobs, but the reality is your wages were changed. You've got to deal with something. And then you get called in a year later and they say, we got to change. You get the picture. Do that 10 times. That, men and women, is working for the man. And that is this man, Laban, who is his father-in-law. I mean, this was a bad guy. He's changed my wages 10 times. But God, I love this, but God did not allow him to hurt me. Isn't that awesome? If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, The streak shall be your wages. I guess it is describing how he changed some of his wages right here. Then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Was it the poplar rods? What was it, the putting them in the gutter? What was it, that kind of thing? No, ultimately, Jacob is giving the credit where the credit is due. God is the one who was blessing me. And it happened, he goes on to tell his wives, at the time when the flocks conceived, that I lifted my eyes and I saw in a dream. He's getting down with his wives and telling them exactly what's going on. I had a dream, ladies. And behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift your eyes now and see. All the rams, I love this, which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted. For I have seen, God says to Jacob, I've seen all that Laban is doing to you. How many would like it if God came to you in a dream and said, I see what your boss is doing to you. I see how the man is treating you. And don't worry, I have your life in my hands. Don't worry, I am with you in spite of what you're going through. I am with you. That's exactly what Jacob said that God, the angel, told him. I've seen all that Laban's doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar when I first spoke to you, when you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now get up, arise, and get out of this land and return to the land of your family. Stop there, men and women. For all his faults, and Jacob had many. We know that he was a liar. We know that he was a thief. We know that he was disrespectful towards his father, and he didn't treat his brother with much respect at all when he was young-ish. But God had a plan to mature this man, and it involved 20 years in the wilderness. This is not the same man that we saw 20 years ago putting on that funny clothing, or the hair on his hands and the hair on the back of his neck, and putting on his brother's clothing and going in and lying to his father. This is a different man. We see someone who now is looking to God and knowing that it was God who was blessing his efforts. Like the mandrakes or the poplar rods, folks, those were really just things that, for all intents and purposes, it would have been like when Moses was in the wilderness and the Israelites were dying, and what did God say to do? Put a serpent on this stick, on this staff, and raise it up, and whoever looks at the serpent will not die. You remember that story in the Old Testament? If not, look it up. That's exactly what happened. He put a serpent on there, he raised it up, and when the Israelites looked at it, they didn't die. Did the serpent have healing powers? No. There was nothing healing about the rod. There was nothing healing about the serpent, but there was something about obeying and trusting God, and that's what they did. And as we just read, as Jacob told his wives, you know what? I obeyed God, what he told me in a dream. And you know what? I trust God. And that is something, men and women, that grew over time. All of us in life, I don't care how old you are and how long you've been walking with Jesus, none of us are done growing in what it means to obey God. None of us are done growing in what it means to trust God. I'm still having times in my life, and so are you, when we have, in a difficult situation, we have to learn to trust God in spite of what we're going through. We have to learn even to obey God in spite of how we're being treated and what we're going through. Jacob, look at this, 14 and then 20 years total. And this guy was he didn't care at all about Jacob. Laban didn't even care at all about his daughters. He didn't even care at all about his grandsons and granddaughter. All he cared about was himself, and yet in spite of that, God was faithful and he blessed Jacob. As Jacob learned in the midst of this difficult situation to obey and to trust. Trust and obey. There's no better way. I forget the rest of the song, but that's how it goes. Trust in Jesus because there's no better way. Something like that. Now, I got to read this all the way to the end. Otherwise, we don't want to come back for it next Sunday. Then Rachel and Leah answered. Here's their response to his great speech. And they said to him, is there still any portion of our inheritance for us in our father's house? That dowry that you'd been working for 14 years, guess what? There's nothing left. He's not saved it. He's not preserved it. Laban has spent all of that money. He's spent everything that was supposed to be ours. Are we, his daughters say, not considered strangers by our dad, by Laban? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. Man, this guy is a bad dude. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. We're going to trust and we're going to obey. And we'll see in the song as we go along. Then Jacob rose. He doesn't even go back. He must have had everything he needed. He arose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. He's obeying what God told him to ultimately. Now is time, get up and go. Now here's Laban. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob stole away, unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he didn't tell him that he was intending to leave. So he fled, Jacob did, with all that he had. He arose and he crossed the river and he headed toward the mountains of Gilead. It's about 300 miles away. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob and all of Jacob's flocks, all the sheep, all the goat, all the lambs, and he had a plethora, he had a lot, and all of his children and all of his camels and all of his donkeys and all of his men servants and maid servants, they all had fled. It would have been a massive entourage. It would not have been a small little camp of people. This would have been a massive entourage. You could have seen this thing coming and going for miles. And so Laban took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. How many of you know he did not come to have a Bible study? He did not come to sing Kumbaya with all of his grandchildren. He was coming to kill Jacob, and he was coming to take everything back. That's what everybody believes about this, and you'll see why. But God, I always say, I love some of the biggest buts in the Bible. They are so powerful. But God. How many times do we read, but God? But God. Oh, look, bleak situation. But God. No way this is going to work out. But God. No way do we have the answers for what it is we need to do. But God. And that's exactly what we read here. But God had come to Laban the Syrian. He didn't just go to Jacob. He actually went to Laban as well. Probably would have shocked him beyond belief. He had his little trinket gods. He had his little divination. He had his little enchantments that he did. And all of a sudden, the God of all the universe comes to him. And it says that he came to him in a dream by night. That's when we dream. And said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Now, I don't know about you, but what's left? If I can't say anything good, if I can't say anything bad, what do I say something that's neutral? What's neutral? I don't know what I'm supposed to say, and maybe that's the point. Keep your mouth shut. You don't say a word to this guy because I am with him. Watch how it works. So Laban overtook Jacob, and now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, here's the confrontation. Here it is. What have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and kumbaya, right? This guy's a hypocrite. He no intention whatsoever. We could have had joyous times. We could have been singing. We could have been playing some instruments, the timbrel and the harp. That's horrible. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. Don't speak good or bad. What does this qualify as? Guy didn't care. He's going to do what he wants. it is in my power to do you harm. And oh, by the way, I had every intent of doing you harm, Jacob. But, there it is, the God of your father, not my God, but the God of your father, Isaac, spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Didn't listen, and now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house, Laban says. But why did you steal my gods? Who cares about your little trinkets? Who cares about your stupid, superstitious little idols? What does that have to do with anything? Why did you steal my gods? But men and women, this is all about that. Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, now this is the longest, most that you'll ever hear Jacob say in all the Bible. This is the most words that he ever will say. He defends himself in a humble but yet honest way. He speaks the truth to the man in this case. Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid is why I hightailed it out of there and didn't say anything to you. For I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. I know who you are. I know what you're capable of. You're a bad man. With whomever you find your gods, do not let them live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen these little trinket gods. And they were small because you'll see where she hid them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent. So the guy is on a rampage now. All he cares about is finding these idols, his little gods. He goes into Jacob's tent. He goes into Leah's tent. He goes into Bilhah's tent and Zilpah's tents. But notice how many tents there are. They didn't all sleep in one tent. Everything was separate. This was a massive thing. He didn't find his gods in their tents. And then he went out of Leah's tent and he went into Rachel's tent. Can you imagine? The guy's just like so angry about this. He's searching, tearing apart every tent to find these little gods. And now Rachel, it says, was the culprit. She had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. That means they couldn't be big, right? Got to be little things. She sat on them, and Laban searched all about the tent, but he didn't find these little gods. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. The Bible doesn't whitewash anything. The Bible doesn't sanitize anything. And people always talk about, Bible's just written by a bunch of people, a bunch of men, they all colluded together and they wrote all these stories and they wrote all these, things. You know what? There are so many things in the Bible that make people look bad that if you were going to write something and make it about yourself, I can lay out so many things that the Bible presents, even like David and how much he wrote in the Bible, and yet it still exposes his own sin. The Bible is an honest, truthful book because men and women were carried along by the Holy Spirit as they wrote these things. And what God wanted us to have, God is capable of preserving and getting to us. Amen? Even though we read these kind of things, it is the manner of women right now that's with me. And so he says he searched, but he did not find the household idols. So Jacob was angry. I said earlier it was his longest speech. This is it, actually. And he rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, here he defends himself, what is my fault? What have I done wrong? What's my trespass? What's my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before me, or before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. Who's guilty here? As far as he knew, he was innocent because he was. He didn't know what Rachel had done, and it really didn't matter, to be honest with you. These 20 years, here he goes on. These 20 years, you know how long he probably was waiting to have this conversation? You ever do that? You ever just like, oh boy, I got to bite my tongue right now. I can't say what I really want to say. Oh, you know what? And then finally, after 20 years, he's got nothing to lose. except his life, and that's still maybe in the balance, though God has spoken, and Laban doesn't appear like he's going to do anything. But now he can finally say what he wants to say. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, they're young. I've not eaten the rams of your flock, which every shepherd had the right to do. Every shepherd had the right when he was watching someone else's flocks. When he and his other shepherds were hungry, they had every right to take one of those animals, to kill those animals or an animal, and actually survive off of that. But he says, I've never even eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts, I didn't bring to you. And that was what a shepherd was supposed to do. If he could present the shrapnels of whatever animal, then he wasn't guilty or bound to have to pay for that animal. But Jacob says, I've never even brought you those. I bore the loss of it, he says. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. This guy was a bad man, working for the man. There I was. In the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters. That was a whole clown show to begin with. But I did it nonetheless. And now 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. He is on a roll. Wouldn't you agree? This is feeling good right now. Not disrespectful, just stating his case. He is just being honest. You changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away with nothing. That's really what he thought of him. You would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. Not true. It's a lie. But what can I do this day to these my daughters or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones, and they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jager Sahadutha. Sounds like a heavy metal band. Jager Sahadutha. But Jacob called it Gilead. This is actually in Aramaic, and this is in Hebrew. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore its name was called Gilead. Also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. There are friends that say Mizpah to one another so that the Lord may watch over you and me. The context of this, folks, is not a friendly thing. Mizpah is not like, may the Lord watch you when you're gone from me and watch me when I'm gone for you. No, ultimately it's saying, I can't keep my eyes on you. I don't trust you as far as I can throw you. So may God keep his eyes on you. These two really in this covenant are essentially saying, I don't ever want to see you again. I'd never want to see you again. And if you cross this line, this heap, then may God deal with you. And if I cross this line in the mountains of Gilead, may God deal with me. But I never want to see you again. And so, if you afflict my daughters, Laban says to Jacob, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Then Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap and here is this pillar which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness and this pillar is a witness that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me. For what? So that we can have a Bible study? So that we can, sing Kumbaya? No, so that I don't harm you and you don't harm me. Laban came with the intent to harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judged between us. And Jacob, it says, swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Whew. I think that's more scripture than I've ever covered on a Sunday morning in 30 years of ministry. But as you can see, you wouldn't want to come back for the second half. But in the end, I'm going to end by saying Jacob was working for the man. Jacob was his situation was difficult because he had a bad boss who was also a horrible father-in-law who really was just a deceitful, dishonest, horrible man. And what you come to realize is if Laban had his way, Jacob, like it says, and his wives and his grandchildren would have walked away with nothing. Laban was really determined to give Jacob nothing. But hear me when I say this, the story makes it quite obvious. In spite of Laban's intentions, fortunately, Jacob had an ally who was open-handed, upright, righteous, and generous. And men and women, that ally was God. Jacob's ally was God. He was with him the whole time. And the secret of Jacob's success in working for Laban is that even in the unpleasant earthly relationship they had, and it, as we saw, was unpleasant, Jacob was really working for God who would protect him and prosper his efforts. I titled this Working for the Man, but the reality is Jacob knew he was working for the man. And there's a massive difference, men and women, when we realize in this life, every one of us has to work. Every one of us has to put our time in. 90,000 hours of our life, a third of our life goes towards work. Some more, some less. And the reality is, the more that we can understand what Paul said to the Ephesians about how we see our work here on this earth, when he said, serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving who? The Lord. Serve wholeheartedly in whatever you do, and as much as you can, look past the man and see the Lord. Look past the human things you have to deal with, because wherever you go and whatever you do, there's going to be human beings. But if we could somehow realize that we're not necessarily working for the man, but we are working wholeheartedly and serving the Lord in whatever we do, wow, that changes everything. I'm not serving men, I'm serving the Lord, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is, and this is back in their time, a slave or free. Men and women, God prospered Jacob, indeed prospered him beyond his grandest dreams. In trying to bargain with God, Jacob had said, if you remember, in Genesis 28, verse 20, I don't have it in here, if God will be with me, way back when, he says, if God will be with me and watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up in Bethel as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you 1/10. Jacob, on the front end, before he went, was asking for God's safety, for food and clothing. Not much, but how much better did he actually fare coming home? Instead of mere necessities, God gave him a large family and great wealth. And Genesis 30, verse 43 says that Jacob became exceedingly prosperous at the hands of God. Next Sunday, I want to look, because I can't do it this Sunday, I want to look at the things that Jacob did in spite of the boss that he had. I want to look at the ways that Jacob approached his work and how it was that God blessed him as he trusted him and as he obeyed him. Amen? Next Sunday. Jesus, we love you. We're thankful for your word.